Hello, we are back with a big morning for you. The Prime Minister's first major interview in number 10 since he took power. He tells me in the cabinet room the Tories broke the country and he is ready to be disliked to sort it out.
We're going to have to be unpopular. Tough decisions are tough decisions. Popular decisions aren't tough, they're easy. When we talk about tough decisions, I'm talking about tough decisions, the things the last government ran away from.
But the Tories are after a new leader to drum up popularity. The former minister, Tom Tugendhat, is the first contender to join us to explain why he wants the job. Now, Tom, you were near the back of the pack in the first round this week. Do you think you'll be in it in 7 days' time?
Absolutely. This is a very flat race, as you can see, and there's everyone competing to change this country for the better. OK, we'll talk to you a bit later on. Also...
You must be Lee Miller. It's a war zone.
A superstar for our first Sunday. Kate Winslet is back talking about her new Can't Look Away movie and her new attitude too.
Laura, life is too short. Do you know, I don't want to look back and go, why did I worry about that thing? And so guess what? I don't worry anymore. I don't care.
And two other queens, Queens of Fleet Street, the editor of The Sun, Victoria Newton, and The Guardian's scoop getter, Pippa Crerar, are with us today, along with chef and Green campaigner Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall. Morning, morning. It's great to be back. And let's start, as we always do, with what is making the news. There's no one dominant story this morning. We've heard Keir Starmer condemning the Tories' handling of the NHS in our interview, and The Observer leads with the government's review into the health service. The Mail on Sunday and the Sunday Express are both going after Labour's plans for tax. Michael Gove, the former Tory minister, tells the Sunday Times that the Treasury blocked him going after Grenfell bosses. We'll hear more from Keir Starmer about that later too. But the Sun and the Mirror splash on Strictly and Oasis. So maybe there's something in there for everyone. Let's then talk about Keir Starmer. So, Victoria, we're going to hear from him at length for the first time, really. But it's been a gloomy first couple of months, hasn't it?
That's right. I mean, they started off sort of hitting the ground running with planning reforms, talking about the NHS reform they're going to do. But then obviously you've had the riots, which I think caught them on the back foot a bit. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag and a gloomy set of predictions from him.
And Pippa, he walked straight into a big row with his party over winter fuel allowance. There's a vote in Parliament on that this week. But how would you assess, you know, how serious it is for him on that issue?
I think it's actually the most serious potential rebellion he's faced of his premiership. It's something which I have found MPs from the left, the middle and the right of the Labour Party are all really concerned about. Their own email inboxes from the constituencies overflowing, and the whips are talking to people and trying to reassure them, say that this is an important part of plugging that black hole that the government say they inherited from the Tories. But there's a lot of wobbles right up at the very top as well.
Really? So wobbling already?
I don't think we're yet at the point of a major parliamentary rebellion.
He's got a huge majority after all.
He does, and not least because, of course, there was that rebellion back in July over the two-child benefit cap, which saw 7 Labour MPs suspended from the party for several months. So the whips will be sort of hanging that over people as a threat of what might happen should they decide to go against. But the public feeling is really strong on this, and MPs too.
And Hugh, you're a proud campaigner for the Green Party, but you know this government has vowed to take a very different approach on the environment and on energy. What's your take on what you've seen so far from them?
Yeah, well, yes, I'm on Keir Starmer's side, and my Green Party colleagues want him to do well, but we want him to succeed in those areas with really, really bold policies, not to be timid. And so far, he's been a little bit on the timid side, certainly when it comes to... I mean, seems to be putting all his green eggs in the energy basket. Mm-hmm. His own climate change committee have made it very clear that there are many other sectors that require reform and bold policies around climate, including, of course, housing, transport, but also food and farming and nature, which I think was a huge issue in the election. And one of the reasons the Tories were so unpopular, because they just didn't appear to give a damn about our green and pleasant land, and particularly our rivers and our seas.
OK, well, there is so much to talk about. There was so much to talk about with him, of course, and we couldn't get to absolutely every single subject, but there is plenty that you are about to hear. 65 days on since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. After 4 years as Labour leader and 14 years of the Conservatives in charge, we have heard again and again how he thinks the country has been broken by the Conservatives, whether the economy, the health service, what we saw in the summer riots, or even just trains that don't run on time. But today he vows he will be unpopular in order to sort it all out. But Labour's plainly delighted to be back in power. Keir Starmer, only the 5th Labour leader to win a general election. So what was it like taking his seat at Cabinet for the first time?
It was a really important moment because it was a moment of great change for the country, change for me and my family, but the chance to do what I came into politics to do. I came into politics relatively late in life. I came in with a clear intention to change the country for the better. It's really hard to do that from opposition. So when we were able to win the election with a good mandate for change and come in here to the Cabinet room and sit down for the first time as a team, it was a really important moment, a moment of change and the beginning of the next stage of the journey for the country, which is very, very important.
Did you have to pinch yourself at all?
Well, you do, you know, as you walk in the door, as I walked for the first time, as you know, I walked up Downing Street, lots of people there, friends, supporters, people I'd known a long time, then stood with Vic at the door opens and you walk in, and that is the moment that I think I really took it in, that, you know, we got the chance to change the country, we own all the problems, of course, but actually the hard work was able to start then.
What you couldn't know on the morning that you walked through is that for days through the summer, there was a series of riots in 20 towns and cities across our country. On Friday, a man called Thomas Burley, who was part of a group that attacked a hotel housing asylum seekers, who was described as having a white supremacist mindset, was giving the longest sentence so far. Over 1,000 people have been arrested over this. You said the riots showed there was a societal black hole. What did you mean by that?
What I meant by that was that the riots, I think, were symbolic of a broken society. Now, I'm not going to justify for 1 minute the violence in those riots. They are not capable of justification. They were not protest. They were far right in the main. But underneath that, I think there was a societal black hole, a breaking of our society, which we need to mend. The immediate problem was to regain control of the situation, to make sure we had enough police across the country to police on the front line, to make sure we had prosecutors and courts able to process the cases and get people sentenced very quickly. I was really clear that we needed to ensure that if somebody was throwing a rock, a plank, or trying to set fire to a hotel on a Saturday or Sunday night, within a week they ought to be starting a prison sentence. And by and large, difficult though that was, we managed to achieve that, which I think played a big part in bringing order to what was a very dangerous situation. That attempt to set fire to a hotel in Rotherham with people inside was particularly chilling.
But do you think the rioters were racist?
I think far right. I think there was racism there. I think it featured differently across the country. I went over to Belfast, for example, to talk to the police service of Northern Ireland, who had petrol bombs thrown at them. And there's no doubt there was racism there. So there was racism far right, but it was totally illegitimate. It is not acceptable in any society. And yes, I accept that, you know, across the country, people have strong views about things like immigration. I accept that. But I'm not prepared to tolerate that sort of disorder under any circumstances, nor will I change government policy one bit as a result of that sort of violence.
Do you think we're a racist country?
I don't think we're a racist country. I think we're a country of decent people, tolerant people. The real Britain was the people who came out the day after in Southport. It was incredible. People came out with their trowels, with their brooms, they cleaned up, they rebuilt. They're the real face of Britain, and that's the Britain that I think is essential to reuniting and bringing this country back together.
But do you think that leaders in this country, perhaps also if you look at what we've seen in Germany, Also look at what's happened in France. Do you think that leaders have been complacent about the rise of the far right?
I am worried about the rise of the far right. I mean, we can see what's happening in Germany with the recent elections, see what's happening in France and other countries. And I'm worried about the far right because it's the sort of snake oil of the easy answer. I'm convinced that the answer to it is delivery in government. So the best argument against the far right, the best argument against the easy answer is to deliver, to bring about the change that we promised we'd bring about. And that change was to improve living standards so people are better off, to make sure we got properly functioning public services, particularly the NHS, and to deal with issues like immigration and crime and sewage. We have to deliver on that. And that's why I'm utterly focused on ensuring we can bring about that change in the period that we've got in government.
Talking though about people feeling great discontent with what the state of this country, many of our viewers will have been appalled not just by seeing the publication of the report into the Grenfell fire this week, but also very distressed that years later there are still people living in unsafe buildings, many of whom might be watching this morning. Can you tell people who cannot right now sleep easy in their beds when they will have their homes made safe?
First, I accept it's my duty of this government and everybody in a position of responsibility to make sure they are safe in their home. We will accelerate the programme. I'm frustrated that it's going as slowly as it is to deal with the cladding. A lot of that is to find sort of true responsibility and to hold people to account for getting on with the job. The money is there, the intention is there. We need to move more quickly on it.
So by when will people who are watching this, who are living in blocks that are unsafe, will they be able to sleep easy in their beds without the fear of a cladding fire?
We're speeding up the process. I want to get this done as quickly as possible. Each block will be on a different timetable. I'm not able to give you an end date, but I can tell you I meant what I said when I responded to the report. I said this has to be a turning point. It does, and we need to speed that up and get on with it as quickly as possible.
Forgive me, Prime Minister, during the election campaign, you made great play of how ready you were, how much preparation you had done, how much you were going to walk in this building and get things done. And then today, you can't give us a date, a deadline, which is what people want to know. When will they be able to sleep easy in their beds? It is years since the Grenfell fire. It is years that you had in opposition. Everybody knew this was coming. You cannot be surprised by what this report has come out with. And this is about people who are, as of this moment, not safe in their own homes.
Let me acknowledge that this has taken far too long. 7 years, this is not unique. We've had no end of injustices that have taken very many years to come to any sort of outcome, and this is not the final outcome. But
you're in charge now. Why can't you give people a date?
And what comes with being in charge is responsibility, the responsibility to make sure this happens as soon as possible. The first thing that therefore needs to happen, and the Deputy Prime Minister is doing this, is going through the books, going through the buildings, identifying where work has been done, where work hasn't been done, who's responsible, and putting in a place to make sure that we can accelerate that as quickly as possible. That work is ongoing. You can't do that in opposition because you simply don't have access to the material, but we're on it, we're working at pace, and we will bring the same mindset to this as I brought to the disorder, which is get people around the table, make the ask of them, the requirement.
Well, with the disorder, you said you wanted everybody in court within a week. You know, you are the Prime Minister now. Some people would want you to hear you say, you know what, in a year, everybody will be safe. In 2 years, everybody will be safe. What's your ambition on this? Because for years, people, victims of Grenfell, their families, and people who are in unsafe blocks have heard politicians for years promise that they were going to speed it up, promise that they were going to accelerate it. It's exactly the kind of frustration that you yourself say you've heard and you understand. And yet here you are today, unable to give them a firm promise.
Well, I'm not going to give a false promise. I think there have been too many of those in the last 14 years where people have given numbers and dates which they've plucked from the sky, which are not meaningful. I'm not going to do that. I know that the work is going on to identify what blocks need work on, how we accelerate it. The money has been allocated. A lot of this now is identifying and pushing those who are really responsible to do this, to do the work that they are required to do. If we need more powers to do that, we'll pass those powers.
Would you like to see people in jail because of what happened at Grenfell?
The last thing I want to do is to prejudice any possible cases. Of course, I want the police to complete their investigations, and we'll give them all the support that they need. And appropriate cases should go through to court. But the worst thing I could do, or anybody could do, for the families of the bereaved, the survivors, the community, the worst thing we could do is to say or do anything which would prejudice the outcome of any proceedings, including criminal proceedings.
It's been a very eventful few months already. One of the decisions also that has attracted a huge amount of attention and has very much upset some of our viewers is your decision to remove winter fuel allowance from the majority of pensioners. As you know, our viewers like to give us questions for politicians, and Ray Bosdet, who voted for you, wrote in to say, "I thought I might regret my vote within a year. I certainly didn't think I would regret it by the first decision made by the new government to attack the pensioners, those in this country who cannot go on to strike to show our disgust." What do you say to Ray, who voted for you and feels terribly let down by this decision?
What I say to Ray and to many people who will have concerns, who are watching this and listening to this, is that we were voted into office to bring about change, to make sure we improve living standards, make people feel better off, to improve
Nobody
public
thought they were
services,
voting for you
to
to
deal
take away
with
their winter
crime,
fuel
deal with
allowance.
immigration and issues like that. I am absolutely clear in my own mind that we can't bring about that change if we don't fix the fundamentals and stabilise our economy. I'm absolutely clear. In the same way, Laura, as I was 4 or 5 years ago when you were interviewing me and I said, in order for Labour to win an election, we have to change the Labour Party. Equally clear in my mind, in order to deliver the change, which we will deliver, we have to fix the foundations now. And that's tough decisions. The first thing we did, the first thing the Chancellor did when she walked through the door next door was to audit the books. What she found was a £22 billion black hole this year. Now, she had a choice, pretend it isn't there, walk past it, or deal with it.
Now, I just want to
deal with it.
I just
So we
want to
have
stop
take
you
tough
there.
decisions.
I just want to stop you there. On that 22 billion, I want everybody watching this to know and understand that nearly half of that 22 billion, £9 billion, comes from decisions that your government has made to give many public sector workers pay rises above inflation, including junior doctors getting 22% of an increase over 2 years. So again, when it comes to winter fuel allowance, that was a choice. It was a political decision for the reasons that you say you want to sort out the economy. But how can you justify it to viewers who feel like it is an attack on some people who've worked hard all their lives? They're not wealthy, they don't have money to spare. And this year, if it's cold, they're going to be looking at the thermostat and wondering if they can pay their bills.
Let me take that head on, because it's a really important point. The last government set up the pay review mechanism, as every government does every year. And they set the framework for that, and they knew that the pay review recommendations would come back. What they didn't do was allocate any money at all to the outcome. Now, that is not a good way to approach pay settlements. Of course, there was a number allocated, they just didn't put it on the books. Can I deal with the second point, because I think it is important, on winter fuel allowance? This is really tough, and I do get that it's tough. It's not easy, and no Prime Minister wants to take a decision like this. But the winter fuel payments are now to be targeted. They were untargeted before, and I think everybody thought that wasn't a particularly good system, so it needed to be targeted. Obviously, those most in need will continue to get the payment. All of those on pension credit will get the payment, and we want to get as many people onto pension credit as we can. We want to align housing benefit with pension credit, something that wasn't done by the last government, which will improve the situation. And of course, this is really important, by ensuring we're fixing the foundations, by ensuring we've got economic stability, something that's been missing for the last few years, we can absolutely commit, and we do, to the triple lock. And what that means, Laura, which is really important, is that the increase in the state pension will outstrip any loss for pensioners of the winter fuel
but also
payment.
pensioners
So that is
like
really,
everybody
really
else
important.
Have been living with inflation, but we've still got other things to talk about. But I just want to briefly ask you.
No, but Laura, I mean, what you say there is really important because talking to many pensioners in the last 2 or 3 years, the things that have hit them most and hardest are inflation, because it got out of control under the last government, energy bills, because the steps that were needed to be taken years ago weren't taken, and the cost of living. I'm determined that no pensioner will ever be put through that before. That's why we're fixing the foundations now, tough though that may be.
And for some of your MPs, the decision is too tough. Some of them are deeply worried about it. If a Labour MP votes against you this week when winter fuel is debated in the House of Commons, will you suspend them or kick them out of the party?
Well, that'll be a matter for the Chief Whip, and we'll assess that as we go along.
You must have a view.
But we're going into a vote. I'm glad we're having a vote because I think it's very important for Parliament to speak on this. But every Labour MP was elected in on the same mandate as I was, which is to deliver the change that we need for the country over the time we've got in office. I am absolutely convinced that we will only deliver that change. I'm absolutely determined we will, if we do the difficult things now. I know they're unpopular. I know they're difficult. Of course they're tough choices. But it's a bit like, I don't know, building a house. If you know your foundations are rotten, if you know you've got damp or cracks, you can paint over it and pretend that you've got a beautiful new house and within 6 months it all falls apart. Or you can say we're going to strip it down, we're going to fix the foundations, and what then will happen, this is where the hope is there, what then happens is you've got a much better house at the end of the exercise, a country built to last, and that's what I'm determined we're going to bring about in the time that we've got in office.
I know a note there you said you know it's unpopular. Are you willing to be unpopular?
We're going to have to be unpopular. Tough decisions are tough decisions. Popular decisions aren't tough, they're easy. When we talk about tough decisions, I'm talking about tough decisions. The things the last government ran away from, that governments traditionally run away from, I'm convinced that because they've run away from difficult decisions, we haven't got the change we need for the country. And because I'm so determined to bring about that change, I'll do the tough things and I'll do them early to make sure that we can bring about the change that we need. So I'm not going to apologise for this, but I do recognise how difficult it is for some people. I do recognise for pensioners it's really hard for some pensioners here, but of course they do rely on the NHS. They do rely on public transport, so these things aren't completely divorced. And with the triple lock, what I can guarantee for the state pension is that the increase under this government will outstrip any reduction in the winter fuel payment.
You mentioned the NHS there. Now, your government asked Lord Darzai, a very eminent surgeon, to look quickly into what was really going on in the NHS. The report's coming out this Thursday, but can you share any of what he has found already?
Yes, I can. I mean, I asked him, he's an eminent surgeon, huge experience. I asked him to do a raw and honest assessment of the NHS, a diagnosis, if you like. He's been really clear that the NHS is broken but not beaten. And the reason he identifies, I'll rattle through them without spending much time on them, is because of the money that was taken out of the NHS, particularly in the early years of the coalition, 2010 onwards. The Lansley reforms, which were hopelessly misconceived, took a lot of money and had to be then reversed. And then, of course, COVID on top of all that, which has put us in this awful position for the NHS. His diagnosis, my conclusion is, the only way out of this now is reform. I think only a Labour government can reform the NHS, and therefore we will use his diagnosis as the platform for the reform that we now need to carry out in relation to the NHS. I promised we'd get the NHS on its feet again, but I also promised I'd make it fit for the future. And this is the diagnosis, if you like, the platform that allows us to properly understand the state of the NHS and why it's in that place. But also, when it comes to technology, when it comes to empowering GPs and preventative measures, to look at how we're now going to reform the NHS so that we can not just look proudly, Labour Party always looks back proudly and says we created the NHS and 75 plus years ago. We've had a fantastic NHS in many respects. What I want to ensure that is in 75 years, people look back again and say, we've still got a fantastic NHS because of the work the 2024 Labour government did.
But again, isn't part of this actually quite a clear political strategy? It is going to be another moment when the new government is saying, look how terrible things are, look at our inheritance. Aren't you managing people's expectation? And if it's all this doom and gloom, How can you expect people to feel inspired or hopeful about what you might be able to achieve?
Well, two things there. Firstly, yes, we've got Lord Darcy's analysis. I don't think anybody watching this is going to be surprised by his conclusion. I don't think they're going to say, well, when I went to A&E, it was perfect. I was in and out in record time. Everybody watching this who has used the NHS or relatives have know that it's broken. They know that it's broken. That is unforgivable, the state of our NHS. Now, I don't think anybody could say that's sort of just us claiming or performative inheritance. If there's one thing this country knows, it's the last government broke the NHS. Our job now, through Lord Darcy, is properly understand how that came about and bring about the reforms, starting with the first steps, the 40,000 extra appointments. But we've got to do the hard yards of reform as well. And as I say, I think it's only a Labour government that can do the reform that our NHS needs, and we'll start on that journey.
OK, two more things that I want to briefly ask you about. You're expected to go to the White House next week. Now, it's no secret that your decision to suspend some arms sales to Israel has not gone down very well across the Atlantic. It has not made the UK government very popular with its closest ally, the United States.
You're wrong about that.
So
we've been talking to the US.
Approves of it?
We've been talking to the US beforehand and afterwards, and they're very clear that they've got a different legal system and they understand the decision that we've taken. So that's very clear. The reason I'm actually going and having the visit is not about that at all. It's because the situation in Ukraine is becoming ever more pressing, as is the situation in the Middle East. I've obviously had a number of discussions with President Biden, both in person and on the phone, and with other allies, France, Germany, Italy, NATO allies, about the tactical decisions we have to make in relation to Ukraine and the Middle East. And we've coordinated a lot of our messaging, coordinated our action, as you'd expect. But what I also want to have the opportunity is for a more strategic discussion about the next few months in relation to Ukraine and in relation to the Middle East. So it's that more strategic discussion that will be the central focus of the visit next week.
You had to defend President Biden when his health was deteriorating. Are you relieved and excited about Kamala Harris as the new nominee, and the Democrats are your sister party?
Well, they're our sister party, and of course it's really good to see the election developing as it is in the US. I'll be very clear, as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I will deal with whoever the American people elect in as their president. But I think it's very important to remember, particularly for Ukraine and for the Middle East, the next few weeks and months are critically important. And therefore, it's important for me to speak to President Biden about our shared response, the response of our allies, to the pressing immediate issues, but also to the more strategic long-term issues. And that's why I'm going both on both of those fronts to have that discussion, Ukraine and the Middle East.
It sounds very much like you're hinting at a significant increase in the level of support for Ukraine, or perhaps giving them the explicit permission they want to use weapons provided by their allies into Russia.
Well, we have increased the support we're giving Ukraine since we've been in office. That's not a criticism of the last government. I supported the last government when I was in opposition, and I'm not now going to suggest that they didn't put the support in we needed for Ukraine. I supported them then, I support what they did. We need to now take this on. We've put more support in terms of capability. In relation to specific capabilities, then you'll understand I'm not going to get into a discussion about that on live television. But of course, I want to make sure that we give Ukraine the support that it needs for as long as it needs it.
As you said at the beginning, this is also now your home, as well as the seat of government. And our viewers won't forgive me if I don't ask you a couple of questions about that, if I may, just quickly. One of the things you've done to make it more comfortable is take down the portrait of Margaret Thatcher that was put there by Gordon Brown, a Labour Prime Minister. Is that a bit petty? Was she really making you feel uncomfortable staring down at you in the study?
Well, the first thing is, Gordon Brown didn't actually hang it in the study. It was hanging somewhere. It was commissioned and hanging somewhere else. I think it was David Cameron that brought it into the study. I used the study for quietly reading most afternoons where I've got to have, there's a difficult paper that I need to. And this is not actually about Margaret Thatcher at all. I don't like images and pictures of people staring down at me. I've had it all my life. When I was a lawyer, I used to have sort of pictures of judges staring. I don't like it. I like landscape. So this is my study, it's my private place where I go to work. I didn't want a picture of anyone. It's a picture of landscapes. As a lawyer, people tried to persuade me that I needed pictures of judges staring at me the whole time. I didn't like it. I don't like it anymore if they're politicians. There isn't any politician staring at me in my study where I just get on with the work I need to get on with.
It's unusual for a politician not to like people looking at them, whether they're in real life or in portrait form.
People have different views. In our house, now flat, you won't, some people have their mantelpieces full of pictures of themselves with world leaders. None of that in ours, not even in the toilet where people traditionally also put it. All I've got is pictures of the kids, the cats now, etc. I might tolerate Thierry Henry on the wall, but that's about as far as I go.
And you've gone there with the cats. So
and we've gone there with the Siberian kitten, which has now joined the family, called Prince.
Well, that is the news that the nation wanted to know. But also one of our BBC listener actually has got in touch, though, about the cat. They were quite upset that you didn't listen to your children's pleas to get a German Shepherd dog. Mike has written in to say, I can't get past the U-turn on the dog. What was he thinking? The nation needs to know. Why no dog?
Well, it was a long summer of negotiations, Laura. I said we would settle it, we'd get in the room with the kids. And they determined that we got this Siberian kitten, which is lovely, by the way. It's sort of white with blue eyes. It was part of the deal that they negotiated for moving into Downing Street. Because this, joking apart, this change has a profound impact on our children. And that's people asked me before the election, what am I most worried about? And I always said the impact on my children. We, as you know, don't have any photographs taken with them. We don't name them. But I have to acknowledge this is a big move for them. And therefore, negotiating a fantastic kitten called Prince was part of the deal that they extracted from me.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for giving us your time this morning and indulging our viewers' eager interest in the Downing Street pets. But we're grateful for your time. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let us know what you thought, of course, whether that's about the cat or the very serious things that we discussed. You can let us know on email, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, as ever. Victoria, I know that people are going to talk about Prince the cat, but serious issues in that. What did you pick out from our interview?
Well, he's really doubling down on winter fuel. And what's surprising in that subject is, my readers are really angry about it, especially that train drivers got paid out. And that's the thing that got the letters flooding in. But it's not just my newspaper, it's readers of The Mirror, The Guardian, The Telegraph. It's across the board. People are really angry about this. There was a political choice that they made and it wasn't in the manifesto.
But do you think that they are handling it in a way that they may come to regret? I mean, people with long political memories might remember there was an early decision from Gordon Brown as new Labour Chancellor to give a very small increase in benefit payments at that point. And it did sort of it soured the atmosphere in some respect. Do you think they might come to regret this?
Quite possibly. And when it gets to winter and if you've got front pages from around the country of old age pensioners dying, that's clearly a worry for them.
And do you think, Pippa, that in terms of the whopping majority they've got, is there already a situation where number 10 are sort of, hard hats on, we're just going to charge forward whatever the party thinks? Because the sort of privilege of a huge majority can also be quite hard to handle, if you like.
Yeah, there's still people in Downing Street that think it's more important that they're seen to stay the course and not to U-turn and not to be seen to be sort of buffeted by whether it's sort of public opinion or MP's opinion, because they're so convinced that they're doing the right thing. And they also think that they have a little bit of time on their hands. Not on this side, not 5 years actually. The next big set of elections for them are in a couple of years' time. But they think they have time to, as long as they're quick about it, to make some of those difficult, unpopular choices, and that they can come back and sort of, prove to people that these measures that they've taken have actually changed things for the better. The problem is, of course, is that they risk their unpopularity being baked in, and they risk people I was interested to hear Keir Starmer talk about hope very briefly, because we've had a lot of the doom and gloom, but very little about what it's for. And I think unless they get better at explaining why this pain is being inflicted on people and convincing them that it's going to be worth it, then it's going to be tough to come back from that.
It is unusual, isn't it, Hugh, to hear a politician say, we will have to be unpopular. It's normally the opposite, is roll up, please like me because I need your votes. It's very deliberate, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think the thing about unpopular decisions is you've got to make the right unpopular decisions. And the winter fuel allowance feels very much like the wrong unpopular decision. There are other ways, there are other policies to raise money, tax in particular, that wouldn't be popular in every sector, but they could raise a lot more money. We've seen some quite hysterical headlines in the right-wing press this morning about that very subject. Ideas being posited that maybe there's going to be a mansion tax or some inheritance tax. I think it's an absolute given that capital gains tax is going to go up. And I don't think that's a bad thing either. But I think if they bit the bullet, I mean, he uses the phrase several times since he's been in office about those with the broadest shoulders paying the burden. For me, that means something like a wealth tax. Mansion tax is a slightly spook. I mean, it's deliberately, because it's an old thing, it's been dragged back out, makes you think of the Hammer House of Horror. It's all going to be creepy and weird. But actually a wealth tax, very straightforwardly, of around 1% for people with assets of over 10 million, that would affect less than 1% of UK households, and it would raise over 15 billion. Not the mere 1.5 billion that they're expecting to save on the winter fuel allowance.
Well, it's always very difficult to know where figures might land up if they make these tax changes. But it's interesting, Victoria, how do you think they are handling this? I suppose political geeks would call it, the narrative. It's very clear. They're like, be willing to be unpopular and do tough stuff earlier on, with the hope that in a couple of years, the country feels different, people feel better off, public services are starting to improve. Do you think that is plausible, that they'll be able to stick to it?
Well, they certainly can't wait for the next election and 5 years to wait to bring people good news. And I do think that's part of their plan. Is going to be 2 or 3 years of really hard labour till they get to something positive. But they're going to have to present a more positive vision soon. So maybe we'll see that at the Labour Party conference.
It was interesting, though, that in talking about his inheritance, so we've heard so much blame being chucked at the Tories. Do you think that can last for that long? Because of course you've been in charge not even for 100 days. It's legitimate to point the finger for some time, but how long do you think the public will accept that, Pippa?
Well, I mean, I think already the fact that Keir Starmer's popularity ratings weren't particularly strong at the beginning, and they've obviously declined even further. And I just think it's something that they need to have an eye on, because people voted for change. They also voted to kick the Tories out rather than any sort of great love for the Labour Party. And then the Labour Party's come in and is inflicting quite a lot of painful decisions on them. I think probably, there are positive things they've done very, very quickly, delivering on some of their promises. We've already got a bill in the Commons to nationalise the railways, for example, a very popular policy. Keir Starmer's handling of the riots, I think, improved his standing amongst some of the sceptics about, law and order. We've seen the beginning of planning reform, obviously very complicated, takes a very long time, but they've talked a lot about housing. And he's resolved, it looks like, the junior doctor strikes, which were causing so many problems when it came to NHS waiting lists. So there is already a story to tell, but we're not hearing any of it, frankly. All we're hearing is the doom and gloom, and very little about, stick with us, it is going to be worth it. And it's not just about the sentiment and the public mood, I think. I think there are already little fears in some on his own party that actually the single biggest ambition they have is growth, and that could start to impact how consumer and business confidence respond if all the government does is talk it down.
And Victoria, we're about to hear from the first of the Conservatives who wants to take on their leadership. Brief word from you. How do you think they are managing the horror of opposition so far?
Well, it's probably quite a shock to them that they don't get the airtime that they used to get. The most worrying thing, I suppose, for them is that they're taking such a long time to make this decision, so that when the budget comes out in October, they'll still have Rishi Sunak there to put across the other side rather than their new leader, which to me seems nonsensical.
OK, well, we can get on with some of the debate, even if the result isn't going to be till November, because while Labour settles in, the Tories are contemplating life in opposition, on the hunt for a new leader to follow their crashing defeat. We'll be talking to the contenders vying for the job over the next few weeks. Tom Tugendhat is the first to join us. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was the security minister in government, and since June 2015, he has been the MP for Tunbridge and Malling in Kent. Welcome to the studio. It's
Morning,
great
Laura.
to have you with us. The first one to front up. Now, you as a party have had a few months to do some soul searching. Why did it go so badly wrong?
Well, the fundamental thing is we lost the trust of the British people, and we can look at individual policies that failed, if you like, whether it's failing to deliver on migration or seeing taxes go up, despite some of us not supporting tax rises on national insurance and such like. But what we fundamentally lost was that ability to have that confidence of the British people. And I'm standing because we need to return our party to the service of the British people. We need to offer the leadership that is fundamental to rebuilding that trust, and we need to act on the promises that we make so that we actually deliver.
Why are you the person to do that? I mean, what would you actually change? Because those are fine words, but in reality, what would it mean?
Well, look at my track record, Laura. I mean, I've spent 25 years serving our country in various different ways. I promised to serve the late Queen in 2000, and I served on operations in Iraq and Afghanistan in the military. I then served again in Parliament, as you know, standing up to dictators in Russia and China and Iran that got me sanctioned, and you've reported on it. And then as Security Minister, actually calling out not just the problems that we've seen, but changing the law. And that has had a really important effect. We arrested and charged, in my time as Security Minister, more Russian and Chinese agents in the United Kingdom than in the previous decade. It's a track record of actually delivering.
But what would you change about your party? You know, some people in the Conservative circles would say, oh, look, we're going to be out for ages. We've got plenty of time to work out what we want to do. One source even said to me this week, there's lots of people who think you probably get a new leader, then you get somebody else in a couple of years because it's going to be such a mess for so long.
Well, look, this is an extraordinary opportunity, actually, for the Conservative Party and for the country to really rethink what it is that we're offering. We need a Conservative revolution in 4 years' time to return the country to the service of the people. We need to make sure the economy actually works for people, delivering a higher wage, lower migration economy, not just shouting at foreigners from the White Cliffs and pretending that you can fix migration by withdrawing from a single treaty or changing a single bill,
Do you
but
think
actually
that's what
changing
some
the
of your
economy.
party were doing previously, shouting at foreigners from the White Cliffs?
I think what we need to do is we need to change the economy of the British people so that it works for the British people. And I think there's a really fundamental decision we need to make. Do we want this economy to work for people? Do we want it actually to see the blood of the economy flowing again so that you get that intergenerational fairness, the link between the energy of the young and the assets of the old? Do we get that connection so that you get geography and generations connected?
But I just wonder also, you say the party needs a rethink. If you've had a bit of a rethink about some of your principles too. A few years ago, this is what you said about the European Convention of Human Rights, which is a big treaty written in the aftermath of World War II. And you said it was an amazing piece of drafting crafted by lawyers in the aftermath of the Second World War. Real landmark piece of legal work many decades ago. But in this leadership campaign, you've started saying that you might be willing to leave the convention, which some people on the right of your party want. What's changed?
So, Laura, in 2013, before I wrote this, I was saying that we needed to change bits of it. We needed to opt out of bits of it, so-called derogation. It still stands. This was an extraordinary piece of legal work written in the aftermath of the fascist regime dominating the whole of Europe. And those lawyers did an enormous amount of brilliant work. But what's happened since then is 80 years of change. Things have evolved, things have changed. Now, those lawyers drafted in various changes that we could opt out of. That's called derogation. And I've been arguing since 2013. The first thing I did when I left the army, actually, was to argue that we need to opt out of certain laws.
But now in 2024, our viewers and Conservative Party members, some of you will be watching this morning, will want to know, are you saying to them, vote for you to be Tory leader and you would campaign to leave the Convention on Human Rights? Or are you actually just flirting with that idea, has plenty Conservatives have done, and saying, well, maybe we might tweak it here or there? What are you actually saying?
What I want to do is right now to derogate from certain aspects of the European Convention on Human Rights.
To leave parts of it.
To leave parts of it, which we can do now. The French do it, other countries do it in various different ways. The second thing is we need to reform it, because actually it's become dynamic, as so-called, since the 1970s and 80s, and it's changed. And if we really can't get the reforms, then we need to be prepared to leave. But prepared means actually doing the work in advance. This isn't something we can just tear off the Band-Aid and pretend it has no consequences. It underpins many other treaties, and we need to be absolutely ready. And my commitment is that we will be ready. We will do the reforms, we will do the derogations, and if they really don't work, then in order to keep the British people safe, I will always do what is necessary.
The problem with this is people who follow Conservative politics closely would never have had you down as somebody who would have wanted to leave the European Convention of Human Rights if push came to shove. And some people might raise their eyebrows and think you're saying this now because you know it's this kind of thing that some Conservative Party members like to hear because you're trying to be elected as the next leader.
Well, actually, there are many different positions in the Conservative Party, as you know. And this is something I've been consistent on for 11 years, Laura. So I'm afraid I wasn't planning this.
They haven't been paying attention?
Well, I wasn't planning this interview 11 years ago. I don't think you were in that seat 11 years ago. So this is something I've been writing, and you can read it in Policy Exchange from 2013 and actually an update in 2015. So this is something I've been completely consistent on for a long time.
With all of the contenders, we're going to try the old chestnut of getting some yes and no answers from politicians. So if you become leader and if you get your ultimate ambition, which of course would be to be Prime Minister
I'm only
at the
running
next
to be Prime
election.
Minister. Let's be clear. The purpose of being Leader of the Opposition is to have that 4 years to reform the party, to make sure you're ready for the 10 years you need to change the country.
OK, so if you got your dream, if that came true, would you bring back the Rwanda scheme?
You need a deterrent. Now, I can't predict whether it'll be Rwanda or something else. The Germans may have already taken on all the capacity of Rwanda by that stage. So we need to make sure we've got a deterrent, as Italy does, as Germany is planning, and many others are.
But you might, I mean, yes or no, if it was as it stands, would you bring it back?
Well, it's impossible to answer a 4-year time question,
Okay.
forgive me.
OK, do you think too many people go to university?
I think apprenticeships are incredibly important. And what I really can't stand is to see this enormous transfer of debt from business to the individual that we've seen over 20 years.
So that's why it's an interesting question. Do too many people go to university?
Well, we need more people to having a tertiary education in many different ways, whether it's university or whether it's through apprenticeships. That's for many people to do, but I would rather see more apprentices.
OK, so would you be happy if there was a fall in university students in order to have more people doing apprenticeships?
Well, universities are private businesses and they should be able to recruit and support as they do.
So government should back off from trying to encourage people to go?
Well, government should be supporting people to be more educated, and in that, apprenticeships offer an extraordinary ability for people to be educated and to work and have a chance. And that's where Gillian Keegan made such a difference.
OK, we're not doing very well on the yes and no.
Well,
so
Laura,
I'm
you're
try
asking
something
complicated
else.
questions.
In one word, what is the most conservative thing about you?
I mean, look, I think the fact that family is the most important thing to me, and I think that's the most conservative thing about many of us, that we are naturally conservatives. As Margaret Thatcher put it, the facts of life are conservative because, it's based on our families and our communities and that society, and knowing there's a difference between that and the state. OK, Tom Tugendhat, it's great to have you with us in the studio for the first time. We'll see what happens this week, the next round. Do you think you'll still be in it by this time? Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we will see. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Well, straight talking, trailblazing, glamorous star. Not just Kate Winslet, but her latest character, Lee Miller, model turned photographer who snapped some of the most powerful images of World War II, including composing a photo of herself in Hitler's bath. Lee tells that incredible story from a life of opulence in Vogue and French villas to the front line and discovering the horror of the concentration camps. I should warn you, you will see some of those distressing images in a moment. But first, Kate Winslet explains to us why it meant so much to her to tell Lee's story.
You must be Lee Miller.
It's a war zone, Colonel. Just Lee is fine.
Just Lee. We don't send women to combat.
Lee Miller was a female photographer who found herself becoming a war correspondent during the Second World War. She was an American woman. She was just an extraordinary life force of a woman who threw herself at life, lived it full throttle, even if it meant suffering the consequences and paying an emotional price for bearing witness the things that she experienced, how she came to be in a conflict zone, documenting the truth behind the atrocities of the Nazi regime for the female readers of British Vogue. She was just unbelievable.
And we see in the film, it's the story of the creeping realisation across Europe about the real horrors of what had happened in the camps during the Second World War. She documents for the world to see what had happened in Dachau and what had seen in some of the camps is the story of the Second World War.
After the liberation of Paris, so many people, particularly back in England, thought, well, that's it. The war's over, celebration, happy times. No. What about all these thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of missing people? It was all being covered up, no one knew. And Lee just wouldn't stop, and she followed lead after lead after lead until eventually she found the train carriages full of corpses and was one of the first photographers through the gates of Dachau, Buchenwald, and photographing the truth behind the atrocities and finding what had happened to those millions of missing people. This is a film about a woman. It's not a film about a war. It's about her internal war with herself and the consequences, the personal price that she paid for putting herself through the challenges of documenting exactly what had happened.
Tell me about Lee Miller in the bath.
So there is an iconic image of Lee Miller taking a bath in Hitler's bathtub. So on the same day that she was in Dachau concentration camp, she and Davy Sherman drove to Munich, and they headed right to Hitler's apartment, probably bribed their way in, and lo and behold, there was a whole other regiment already in there having a party. And yeah, sure, there was a bathroom. There was hot water and a bathtub. And of course they would have a bath. They were filthy dirty, number one. But of course, as she got in that bath, I can totally see Lee with her sense of whimsy and just how brazen she was. My God, that was a damn fine scoop. There was no way she wasn't going to get her good friend Davy Sherman of Life magazine to photograph her in that tub. And if you look at the image, what's so amazing about it is she's absolutely posing. She leans forward and she poses like this. And she did say to Davy, make sure you frame up my tits or we'll never get it past the censor.
You were asked a while ago about a scene in the film, and you said that there was a crew, somebody on set had said, oh, you should sit up. And now I know that you said that in the magazine interview, and then of course it created headlines because what you had talked about was your physical appearance inside a film when you were playing a character. Do you find there's a bit of a trap because for many years you've been incredibly honest and candid about how the body police come for women in the public eye, and then if you don't say anything, if you don't call it out, well then you tolerate it. But if you do say something, then that creates a story and headlines all of its own.
Well, you know, it's interesting how much people do like labels for women. And they very much liked them in Lee's day, and annoyingly, they sort of still do. You know, we slap these labels on women that we just don't have for men. It's absolutely bizarre to me. It was my job to be like Lee. She wasn't lifting weights and doing Pilates. She was eating cheese, bread, and drinking wine, and not making a big deal of it. So, of course, her body would be soft. But I think we're so used to perhaps not necessarily seeing that and enjoying it. The instinct, weirdly, is to see it and criticise it or comment on it in some way. And people were saying, God, how wonderful. You know, she's saying that she doesn't care about her body. I was talking about the character. It's the character that I'm playing. But of course I don't care. But it was through the conversation about playing Lee. And I think my point is that as women, you know, we so need to be having that conversation and just celebrating just being a real shape and being soft and maybe having a few extra rolls. Laura, life is too short. Do you know? I don't want to look back and go, why did I worry about that thing? And so guess what? I don't worry anymore. I don't care. I'm just going to live my life. I'm going to enjoy it, get on with it. You got one go around, make the most of it.
The last time that we spoke, because of your incredible film, which you then, congratulations, got the BAFTA for, I Am Ruth, which was a Channel 4 production about a family whose lives are turned upside down by social media. Do you still, as you said then, look at the tech companies and think, stand up and do something, you know who you are?
I do still think stand up and do something. I'm just finding it staggering that more isn't being done. It's an extraordinary thing as an actor sometimes when you can just open that door to a conversation. And I was overwhelmed by how much we really did ignite debate. There has been this real upswell in communities, and in fact entire towns, it turns out, in this country, where they are making them social media or even smartphone-free zones for children under 16. And that's why we made I Am Ruth, is because I was realising that so many people I was coming across and hearing about their awful, sad stories, they just felt so isolated and alone and shameful, thinking, oh my God, it's just me. How has this happened to me, to my child? And so I do think it's changing. I'm hoping it will change a lot more. But hopefully, you know, little by little, we might get there.
Kate, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you again.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Well, and I'm sure in the next few months we'll come back to that issue of social media. We know how much you at home care about it, and we've talked about it a lot here in the studio. But Victoria, as a female tabloid editor, and of course the tabloids have changed a lot over the years, but it's interesting hearing Kate Winslet there as someone who's been in the public eye for such a long time, saying she doesn't care, but clearly frustrated that women's weight, women's bodies are still news stories. Why is that the case in 2024?
Women like talking about other women's bodies is one point I would make, but what you've got now that didn't used to happen is people like Kate, and she's fantastic, by the way. We all should have more Kate Winslet. So many more female celebrities now talk about their own bodies and their own hang-ups, and I think that's how the conversation has moved on a bit. I'd just like to point out that when The Sun did a feature on this amazing new film, Lee Miller, we wrote all about Lee Miller, and it was an interview with her son and nothing about Kate Winslet's body.
Well, it's interesting. Do you think it's changed, Pippa, over there? But it clearly has changed over the years, but you can see that frustration there. There's a sort of a trap for women, and also some men in the public eye are now talked about in a way that they didn't used to be. You know, there's plenty of pictures of Love Island contestants in their trunks, and just as there are women in their bikinis.
Probably less in my part of journalism and politics, although we have all written a few stories about Robert Jenrick, the Tory leadership contender, and his use of a weight loss drug. Look, it's difficult, isn't it? Because as the point you make in the interview there, or Kate Winslet makes in the interview there, is that, you know, if you talk about it, then it becomes a news story, and if you don't, then, you know, can you ever challenge what happens? And I do think that social media has a huge amount to be responsible for. I think you're right. We will hear a lot more about that in my sphere, political sphere, in the coming years, as I think parents and users of social media get more and more worried about it. And, you know, social media companies are publishers and have a responsibility, I think. And you know, I worry very much about what a wild west it seems to be out there on social media with teenage children, and all you need to do is sort of like scroll through X in its coverage of the US election, and it's really alarming. So, you know, I mean, it is a problem way beyond how women are characterised on you know, in particular media. A much broader issue we should all be concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, she brings up an extremely important point at the end of an excellent interview, and I'm glad to hear you're going to be looking more at social media, not least because, of course, it was one of the drivers of the riots over the summer. I mean, this is it affects all of us in so many ways. It affects our kids, it affects body perception, but also it affects the big political picture, and it affects the way we behave towards each other as a society. And we have to haul the social media companies to account, because they are ultimately responsible. As you say, they are publishers, and if they're publishing hate speech and they're publishing incitement to violence and they're publishing racism, then we have to deal with that, and they need to be held responsible.
Victoria, final word to you on that. I mean, do you feel, as the editor of a major print brand, who's got more power now?
What, social media companies versus, well, firstly, The Sun isn't just a print brand, we're a digital brand too. Social media companies are incredibly powerful, and it is quite worrying that some of the stuff that you see on their platforms, we would be shut down if we were to allow some of that stuff to be published on ours.
Do you think Rupert Murdoch or Elon Musk is more powerful these days?
Oh gosh, I'm not going to answer that question, am I?
Unfair to ask you a question about your boss in public on air, but all three of you, thank you. It's been great to have you with us today. Get us kicked off for our new political season. And of course, we love to hear from you, so thanks for getting in touch today. After Keir Starmer's interview, Baz in Northumberland has said, "I'm a 70-year-old OAP. Facing more austerity at my age is cruel and an unusual punishment." Christine Webster, again, talking about the winter fuel allowance. Labour's breaking all of their promises and they should be held accountable. Blaming the Tories for their decisions does not wash. But Elena has said, "I'm impressed by our Prime Minister. He seems honest and clear in his answers." Well, we'll be hearing plenty more from him and all the politicians in the coming months. Thank you to all of my guests who've been with us today. Thank you to you, of course, most of all, for watching. It's great to be back on a day when the Prime Minister, in his first big interview in Number 10, told us he is going to have to be unpopular to change the country in the longer term. That's not, of course, a position any politician wants for long, but along with managing expectations, there are plenty of obvious obstacles ahead, and of course, those fabled events which can knock governments way off course. We'll be here every Sunday as the new government beds in and the other parties adjust to this new reality. And I'll be reunited with Paddy O'Connell shortly. There he is. Give us a wave, Paddy, if you can hear. We'll be on BBC Sounds. Oh, he just about did it, not very enthusiastically. We'll be on newscast together on BBC Sounds later today. Everything's also on iPlayer, of course. And if that's not enough, you can sign up to our Thursday newsletter too. But I will look forward very much to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.